Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Cesar Carino, and today our host is Wesley Allen. Wes, we're awfully glad that you're able to come because you can bring us a lot of history of Wadsworth. Not only the fact that you were born here, more than 40 or 50 years ago. How many years ago were you born here?
89.
89 years ago. Now, you'll be 90 pretty soon, won't you?
Mm-hmm.
What day?
October 31.
October 31, Halloween Day.
Right.
That's right. You'll be 90 years old. And the other reason we'd like to have a conversation with you today is that you are probably one of the oldest people still living and still able to get around who worked at the match and in some kind of a capacity that would have given you an opportunity to know the entire plant and the inner workings and so forth. When did you start working at the match?
When?
Yes.
1926.
1926. Was that fairly close to when you graduated from high school?
Yes, I graduated the year before, 25.
What did you do from 25 to 26 then, Wesley?
I went to Hamel Business University for part of that time, and part of it was, of course, during school vacation. I worked at the Wadsworth Salt Company.
You worked at the salt company. What did you do at the salt? Where was the salt at that time?
Well, it was on what's called State Street now. Then it was Mill Road.
Mill Road. The Mill Road is still there, incidentally, but we call it State Street where the foundry was, or the salt works were.
Yes.
What did you do there? Describe the salt works as you remember it. Very few people have been in there.
Well, it was, I was on a filling line. In other words, the boxes would come down and salt would be poured into them, and then the boxes would go to a machine that wrapped them in wax paper.
And wax paper.
And that didn't function very well. They would be leaking, so I'd take those off and stack them up, and later on they'd repackage them.
I see. Where did they get the salt?
Where did they get it?
Mm-hmm.
Out of the salt wells.
Which were right there.
Yes, they forced water down and brought the water up, which would be saturated with salt, and then they put them in dryer pans where they evaporate the water, and of course the salt was left in the pan.
Of course. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, do you remember some of the people who worked with you there at the salt, Wes?
Well, there was Jim Simmons, who was
Jim Simmons from Western Star.
Superintendent of the factory. And of course, I knew some of the officials. There was Dr. Boyer.
Dr. Boyer, what did he do there?
Well, he didn't actually work there. He
Kind of on the board of trustees or something.
he was a finance man.
He was the finance
He
man.
had money invested. In
Oh, I see. Okay, Dr. Boyer. He was a local physician, was he not?
He was a dentist.
A dentist here in Wadsworth. Now, we're going to get to the match company and also to your early days, but while we're on the salt, the Ohio Salt Company, or did we call it the Wadsworth Salt at that time?
Wadsworth Salt.
Wadsworth Salt. While we're down there, let's talk a little bit about that, because I think you're the only person we have ever had on our programs, and to the best of my knowledge, probably the only one we will have who had anything to do with the salt. Of course, you know, if there's anybody out there who worked at the salt and has a good history of it, I surely would like to interview that person. How many people worked at the salt? How big was it?
Oh, I suppose maybe 100.
100 people? Mm-hmm. And you remember going into work from where? Where did you live at the time?
I lived on Pine Street.
On Pine Street. So you probably walked to the salt, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. It was what, 3 or 4 or 5 blocks, something like that at the very, very most. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your earlier life on Pine Street. What part of, well, it was always the south end of town, but what did it look like? What did the south end look like at that time?
Well, pretty much like it does today, except the properties aren't kept up quite as well now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Very nice area
Oh,
at
yes,
one time.
yes.
As a matter of fact, as I understand it, the South End really was kind of the hub of Wadsworth at one time. Is that right?
well, naturally, we were just a few blocks north of the railroad station,
Right,
and that's where the activity was.
And what kind of activity was at the railroad station, Wesley?
Well, where the people would get on the trains to go east or west, and the shipping would come in boxcars. There was a freight station there where they would unload partial shipments. Well,
Where was the freight station in juxtaposition to the passenger station?
it was the passenger station was on the north side of the tracks, and the freight station was on the south side, and half a block east.
Half a block east. That was torn down many, many years ago, was it not?
Yes.
But
It was, the street there was called Mechanics.
Mechanic Street, that's right. Mechanic Street is still there, and there's a welding shop there.
Yes.
But at one time, right in front of the welding shop was the, pretty close in front of the welding shop, or closely aligned to the welding shop, was the freight station. Is that correct?
Yes.
What about the stores in the South End? What were some of the stores that you remember in the South End, Wes?
Well, there was Fenton and Leatherman's grocery store.
And where was that located? Where is it now? What's there now?
I really don't know. Oh, it's not there.
It's not there. They tore that down.
DH&L
DH&L.
land goes up over there to the railroad, and it was in the south corner, right next to the tracks.
Right next to the tracks.
And then there was another grocery store. Well, there were two others. There was Geisinger's on the east side of the street, and farther north was Roy Curtis.
Roy Curtis.
And across the street was Giles Meat Market. They didn't have meat and groceries together then.
They had meat in one spot and groceries in the other. Now, the Giles Meat Market was right on the corner of what is now State Street and Main Street. Is that correct?
No.
No?
The corner of, well, there's a filling station or something, and then Giles on the corner of Water Street.
Oh, right on the corner of Water Street there.
And,
I see.
Yes, it's on the east side.
On the east side of the road. When you were a young lad, let's see, you were born, if you were 90 years old, you were born in or you're going to be 90 years old, you were born in 1907, is that correct?
Right.
So in 1913, you started school, pretty close to 1913. No kindergartens in Wadsworth at that time, is that right? So you went right to the first grade, and you obviously then had to go to Franklin School, is that correct?
I went to Central. Franklin wasn't there.
Ah, that's what I wanted to hear you say. Everyone thinks that Franklin has been there for 100,000 years, and we didn't have Franklin at that time.
Right.
You went to Central School, so you walked from Pine Street to Central, which was what, 3 or 4 blocks?
Yes.
Something like that. And you went into the first grade. Now, you showed me something here a little while ago, and we're going to get some close-ups of this later on. But here is your first grade report card, written in beautiful Spencerian script, Wesley Allen, and you were present every day in that year, and you were never tardy, and you were never absent in the first grade. And that was signed by Mabel Hartman, your first grade teacher. That was the 1913-1914 school year. What do you remember about Central School at that time? Who all was there? I mean, did we have just the first 6 grades, or did we have the entire high school there as well? What was it like? And where was Central School at the time?
Well, it was right between Main and Lyman.
Right.
There was a long walk from Main Street back to the school. I say long, 200 feet maybe, or 300. And Miss Hartman was the teacher. And, we had slates instead of paper to write on.
Slates instead of paper.
She took the slate, and with a knife, she scratched lines on one side of it so we could learn to stay on the line.
In the first grade? Mm-hmm. How many kids were in that first grade classroom with you?
Well, I suppose 25 or 30.
25 or 30. And they came from all over Wadsworth? How many first grades were there? Do you remember that?
Just the one.
Just one first grade. In 1913, just one first grade. Now we have about 20 first grades throughout the city, but we had only one. Do you remember the population of Wadsworth in 1913 or 1910, in that area when you were born?
No, I don't.
Probably well under 2,000 people, wouldn't you?
I would think so.
And Pine Street, was it paved or not?
No.
Was Lyman Street paved?
No.
Was any street paved?
Just Main and College and Broad and High.
And they were paved with what?
Brick.
Brick. Do you remember who laid the brick?
I should know, but I can't come up with the name.
You probably watched them build it, did you not?
No.
No?
It was always there as far as I'm concerned.
They've always had the brick there, that's right. Now, down in the south end, South Wadsworth as we call it now, we had the DH&L feed store, and we had those meat markets, the meat market, we had some grocery stores and so forth. Did we have any clothiers down the south end?
Later on, there was a clothing store there. And I can't remember the man's name. He had worked for the railroad, so he saw an opportunity there for business, and he started a clothing store.
Right down in this, do you remember where it was?
Yes, it was on the west side of the street, north of Curtis's grocery store. And, well, Giles' house was on that side of the street, and his meat market was across the street. So it was between Rainbow and, at that time, it was called Dutt Street.
Dutt?
Dutt, D-U-T-T.
Dutt Street, and
Yes.
now we call it State Street, is that right? Dutt Street. Could it have been the same place where Peter Basco had his?
That's the name.
Peter Basco.
Yes.
He came from Hungary, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah, Peter Basco had a store down there. Now, going back to Central School, who was the principal at that time, and who was the superintendent? Do you remember?
Well, A.W. Elliott
A.W. Elliott was the superintendent.
superintendent. And
Swearingen, perhaps?
no, before him,
Before?
Paul Kreider.
Paul Kreider. Now, which Kreider family did he belong to here in the?
Well, he lived in a house right north of the First Church of Christ, is it? Used to be the Reformed Church.
Right, the United Church of Christ.
United
right.
Church of Christ, yes.
He lived in that little kind of a stucco house right north of there.
Yes.
And
Well, I think the stucco house was newer. It was a large wooden house.
Wooden house.
With a porch across the front and the north side.
and this man's name was Paul Kreider.
Yes.
I wonder if you had been related in any way to Paul Kreider, who lived on Main Street then and who was a foreman at the Ohio Injector Company for a while. Any relationship, do you think?
I don't think so.
Probably not. Kreider family is a huge family here in
Yes.
Wadsworth. A lot of brothers came across from Pennsylvania and so forth. So you remember the principal, and you remember the teachers, and you remember the superintendent. Just out of curiosity, can you remember the custodian's name?
Jake Everhard.
Jake Everhard. And what do you know specifically about Jake Everhard? What did he do in life?
Well, he, of course, kept the floors clean with
Yes.
a push broom. And at night, he would wash the blackboards or see that they were relatively clean so they'd be ready for the next
Next
day's
day.
use.
And did he do anything in town? Where did he live? Do you know anything about that?
No, but he had a son who was a doctor.
And what was his name?
Seems like it was M.W.
M.W. Everhard was a physician. And did he stay here in Wadsworth then?
Yes.
Yes. And his father was the school's custodian.
Yes.
Right. Which shows the American dream that can come true, is it not, Wes? Because this man probably didn't make more than a couple dollars a week
Right.
as a custodian in 1910, 15, something in that area. His son went to school, became a medical doctor.
Right.
Do you know whether he had any other children besides the one who became a physician?
I don't remember any others.
Don't remember any other ones. Now, how did you get to school? How did the people come to school who did not live 3 or 4 blocks from the school?
Well, I have no recollection except later on. Well, this was when the country school came into town. They had wagons.
They had wagons drawn by horses.
Horses.
As a matter of fact, they changed from the horse-drawn wagons to motor-driven school buses sometime in the mid-20s. Where we lived in Silver Creek, the first school bus came by, well, motorized school bus came by in 1927. My oldest brother was a first grader at that time, and he rode the first school bus.
Well, good.
He rode the first school bus, and you remember him because he's going to come into play here later on in another function of your life.
Right.
Let's go to the match shop now. You worked at the Salt for about a year, is that right?
No, that was just 3 months.
Oh, for 3 months during the summertime.
Vacation.
For vacation. Then you went to the Salt, is that right? Or you went to Hamel Business College?
Yes.
Which was where at the time?
It was in Akron, the corner of High Street and East Market.
East Market and High. How did you get there?
Well, we went by streetcar.
Went by streetcar. Where did you pick up the car?
Well, either down at the square or it would stop at where it crossed on East Street and pick us up there.
It would go right down East Street, would it not?
No, it crossed East Street going east.
It crossed East Street.
East Street runs north and south.
Right. It crossed East Street, went behind where the old post office was, right? And behind the Young Properties, where the Methodist Church is now,
Yes.
went behind there.
That's right.
Crossed East Street, and then went on through to Silver Creek, then to Barberton,
Right,
then to Akron.
right.
How much did it cost to go to Akron?
I think it was 20 cents.
20 cents. You would take the streetcar, go to Akron. Would it be a long drive? Would it take about an hour or
It'd
less?
take an hour.
Take 1 full hour to go to Akron. It would stop along the way.
Yes.
Do you remember where those stops were?
Well, after Silver Creek and Sherman
Sherman,
and West Barberton,
West Barberton,
and of course downtown Barberton,
downtown Barberton,
and then Kenmore before they got
Kenmore,
into Akron proper.
right? They had a stop 97.
Stop 97.
Stop 97, which was right on the curve of Kenmore Boulevard, where Kenmore Boulevard begins, was stop 97.
Right.
And that would go into Akron, and then turn around and come back. What time did you have to leave in the morning to get there, Wesley?
Well, actually, I roomed in Akron.
Oh, you
I
didn't
didn't-
take a room in Akron
No,
then?
I just go home on the weekends.
Oh, I see. Where did you room?
Well, it was on North Forge Street at the
North
corner
Forge.
of East Market.
North Forge and East Market. Do you have any idea how much you paid for a room in those days?
It was $3.50 a week.
$3.50 a week. You can't do that in a minute. What did you get for $3.50 a week?
Well, we just had the room, and we'd eat at restaurants.
What did you study at Hamel Business School?
Well, bookkeeping and arithmetic and spelling.
And you're still very good at that.
Yes.
You're still very good
In
at
other words, it was just actually repeat of high school.
Right, except that it much more intense.
Slightly.
Much more intense. Now, you came back then, you got a job at the match. What was your first job, and who hired you? And who were the people there at the time?
Well, the office manager hired me, J.A. Crumrine.
J.A. Crumrine. Describe him, kind of a different kind of a person, a wonderful person.
Well, he was very precise.
Extremely precise.
And
He has a lot of descendants here in Wadsworth right now, does he not?
no,
Not that, none?
no, his family doesn't live here anymore. I don't know.
Not at all, then. I
He
thought that-
had 2 children, Robert, who became a dentist,
Right?
and Doris, and she married, and well, of course, I don't know where Bob is either. I suppose he probably practiced in Akron in his dentistry.
Dentistry. And Mr. Crumrine hired you, and what did you do? And what was the decorum like in the offices in those days?
Well,
Did you have coffee pots and donut machines and computers and...
I was very quiet. I thought I was still in school. I was free to talk out loud.
You were free to talk out loud, but not very often, is that right?
Right.
And what were the secretaries like? What did they do? How did they perform their jobs?
Well, similar to today, they wrote shorthand, and of course typed it on the typewriters.
Did they have typewriters going in those days?
Yes.
Kind of clunky though, weren't they?
Yes.
Were not so...
They weren't electric, they were manual.
Manual.
I had taken typing in high school, but I didn't actually do any typing work in the office.
What did you do? What was your first job? What did you do?
Well, it was just figure work. It seemed that the price of matches was going down, and when the salesman sold the matches to a wholesaler, they guaranteed the price. If the price goes down, we'll refund your money. And we'd get reports, the salesman would send in of stocks that the various warehouses had, and we'd figure 10 cents or 15, whatever the reduction in price was, and then send them a credit for that amount.
How many people worked at the match shop when you first started?
Well, I really don't know.
Men, women, both?
Yes,
And a lot of foreign-born people, as I remember, is that correct?
well, some were, of course.
And what about the activity? I mean, at the present time, you go by the match shop and it's kind of dead. What was it like in what year was it? 1925, 6?
When I started, 1926.
26. What was it like?
Well, it was a busy place.
It started at 6:30 in the morning, didn't it? The first shift?
Yes.
And it ended at 3:30 or 3?
Well, I don't recall if they had a second shift in or not. Probably only had the
Had only one shift. Can you describe what it looked like at 6:30 in the morning or 6:15 in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning? People coming from all over, walking down Injector Hill, what we call Match Shop Hill or Injector Hill. Were there many cars?
No.
Not too many cars.
No.
How did they get there?
Of course, I didn't get there at 6:30. Working in the office, I got there at 8.
8 o'clock.
And most of the people walked.
Where were you living at that time? On Pine Street
On
yet?
Pine Street.
And you walked to work. And where were the offices, and who was the boss of your office at the time?
Well, Mr. Crumrine was the office manager.
Of the office. And how many people worked in the office?
Probably 20.
Do you remember any of the names of the people who worked in the office with you, Wesley?
Well, my immediate superior was Claude Edis.
Claude Edis. He had a son, George,
That was,
or his uncle, his nephew.
he was a nephew.
Yeah, nephew George.
Yeah.
What did Claude Edis do?
Well, he was the assistant office manager, and he saw that we got our work done right.
Do you remember anybody else who worked in the office? Say, for instance, at your level, or newcomers, or whatever.
Well, there was one of the ladies was Harriet Hartzell.
Harriet Hartzell. Now, who was she? Which Hartzell family did she belong to?
Well, it seemed like her husband, Hartzell, Alan Hartzell.
That Hartzell.
Yes, was her. I believe it was her husband.
Her husband or father?
I believe husband.
Her husband, okay. And that she worked at the match shop. Do you remember any other people who worked down there at that time?
Well, there's Ethel Goss.
Ethel Goss.
She was a sister of Dr. Paul.
Dr. Paul Goss, who was a dentist.
And, well, starting at the top, E.J. Young was the president.
He was E.J., Irvin J. Young was the president.
Yes. And then Mr. Crunrein's office.
All right.
And then was Don Young's office.
Now, what did Don Young do?
Well, he was the assistant to his father, who was...
Don was E.J.'s son.
Right.
Right? And he was assistant to his father. Okay. And who else? You're starting at the top. That's a good place to start.
Yes.
And could you name some more people?
Cosmo Chapin.
Cosmo Chapin. What do we know about Cosmo Chapin?
He was a purchasing agent and also traffic manager.
Traffic manager. Now that name is going to come up again pretty soon with Wesley Allen, is it not?
Right.
Because you finally became the traffic manager at the match shop, is that correct?
Correct.
What does a traffic manager do?
Well,
Does he have a whistle and waves people on? No.
well, we arranged for the incoming material coming in either by railroad or truck, and same way with shipments of matches out.
Now, what were some of the things that you had to import for the match to be made?
Well,
I remember big rolls of paper,
yes.
huge rolls of paper, weighed several tons. I remember they were down in the basement, were they not?
Yes.
Underneath the offices. What other kinds of things did you have to import? Did they have phosphorus?
The boxes, of course, were made at Richmond at the Ohio Box Board.
Ohio box, but the match boxes were made down there.
The match boxes were made at the match company.
And what boxes do you mean then? Oh, I mean the shipping boxes?
Cases, yes.
Okay, the cases that were shipped out were made at the Ohio Box Board, which of course is one of the 4 sister companies
Right.
of the Ohio companies. Ohio Box Board, Ohio Salt, Ohio Injection, and Ohio Match, all pretty well owned by the Young family, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, what raw materials did you have to order as the traffic manager?
Well, we got potash, which is one of the chemicals, and of course all the other chemicals. I can't remember what they all are.
Surely. And would they come in barrels or in boxes, or how did you get them?
The potash came in steel drums.
Steel drums.
And one other thing there, during the war, the potash originated in Germany, so that was shut off during the World War I. And there's a building down there, it's referred to the chemical plant. They made potash there.
Down behind the match, was it not?
Yes.
Is it still there, do you think? Has been torn down?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but they used to, they called that the flare plant, was it?
Yes, later on it was a flare
They
plant.
called it the flare plant way back in the back there.
Yeah.
They made their own potash then. How do they make potash? Do you have any idea?
No.
But that was an essential ingredient in making matches, the tip of the matches, right? We had the Ohio blue tip matches. The only ones in the world, is that correct? Or is that just one of the Wadsworth myths?
That was just the one, the brand made in Wadsworth.
But they had a blue tip on them, and many of them had red tips, but these were the blue tip matches.
Yes.
And they came in a big box. We had the big stick, is that right?
Yes.
And the wee-wees. What were the wee-wees?
They were small boxes that sold for a penny.
Sold for a penny. Just out of curiosity, did you in your lifetime ever buy a box of matches?
Did I ever buy
Yes.
a box? Not recently.
Well,
Though, there's one thing. Before I made my last move, I live in an apartment now. The auctioneer sent the people through and got all of my stuff together, and he wouldn't sell. I think they sold matches. I don't have any anymore.
oh, is that right? Well, there are probably some there that have been around for a long time, better off without them because they can start a fire, as you know.
Right.
I'm 66 years old. My next birthday, if I live, will be 67. I have never in my lifetime purchased a box of matches, and I want to go all the way through life saying that I never purchased a box of matches, yet I have more matches than I'll ever be able to use. Did they not used to give matches to the employees every Friday afternoon?
Yes.
And did they do that with the office staff as well?
Yes.
And what kind of matches did they give you? I mean, was it the stick matches, the book matches, the wee-wees? What would they give you?
Well, the regular sized stick matches.
You know, a box of them.
Yes.
Every week.
Well, I don't recall how often, but maybe they were there as you walked. The people walked out, punched their time card. If they needed some matches, they'd just take
They
them.
would just take them. But almost nobody in Wadsworth ever had to buy matches because they were readily available. Something that a lot of people just can't understand, you know, we take it for granted, really. As a matter of fact, we take two big things for granted in this area. One is rubber, and the other is matches. Wherever people go, or when people come from far away, they can't get over the fact that rubber is made in Akron. Of course, it was made here in Wadsworth as well. And matches, of course, matches are made elsewhere in the world, particularly, well, rubber might be too now, but at that one time we were the rubber capital, and we did have, as I remember, the largest match factory in the world. Is that correct, or is that another one of the Wadsworth myths?
That's right.
It is correct. The largest match
Got a
company in the
picture
world.
of it here.
And do you have a picture of it? Let's take a peek at that picture of the largest one in the world.
Get the right thing out here.
You know, so many of these things, Wesley, in our experience, we begin saying them and then we start believing them. And I just wanted to be sure that this one, the world's largest match factory in Wadsworth, Ohio, we're going to show you a picture of this in a few minutes. Headquarters of the Ohio Match Division of Hunt Foods and so forth. Well, that was a little bit later on, when 18 acres of facilities, turning out more than 300 million
This may be it.
wood and paper matches every day, enough to reach halfway around the world. And here's another picture of the match company. And this is in Highlighter, which is a publication of the Hunt Foods. 17 and a half acres they claim under one roof. Under roof, it says, turning out the famous Ohio blue tip matches in a variety of sizes and forms. The old original building, built in 1890, shown on the cover, appears on the right, nestled in the row of buildings fronting on Mill Street, which runs diagonally across the foreground. And it tells us more about the buildings here and what was, obviously it's an air shot from the air, and we're going to show this in a close-up in a few minutes. But that's interesting.
That was the front door.
The front door of the match shop, right there. The first home of Ohio Match just before the turn of the century. And this would have been before 1900, and there was the match company right there. Now, do you remember this building that you see right there?
Yes, that's where I went to work every day.
You went to work inside there. And where was the factory part of that?
It was back.
Behind.
Behind it.
Behind. Okay. Now, let's go to, we're going to come back to the match company here in a few minutes, but let's go to another area of Wadsworth with which you're particularly familiar, and that's music. Strange enough, several of the people that we have interviewed have been involved with music. What was your involvement with music in Wadsworth?
Well, I started out, to begin with, my father was a violinist,
Father was a violinist.
and my older brother and another brother was a cornetist.
I see.
So I got a clarinet,
Got a clarinet.
and I took lessons from Clyde Opplinger.
Clyde Opplinger. Tell us about Clyde Opplinger. He was quite a person too, wasn't he?
Well, he not only was a music teacher, but he directed the Wadsworth Band.
Okay, and then and tell us about the Wadsworth Band and where it met and how many people were in it and what kind of music they played and when it was in its glory.
Well, we met in the upstairs room, several locations on Main Street. I can't think.
Not above the bank, but where the city loan was at one time. There's a stair step that goes upstairs, and I think that Jim Westbrook used to have an office there too after many, many
Yes.
years. In that area.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been above the old bank building, I'm not sure. It's
Well-
hard to tell what building you're above when you go up those stairs because you can't see what's below you. But you practiced up there.
Right.
And he was the band director. Mr. Opplinger was the band director, is that right?
Opplinger.
Yes.
Yes.
And how many people were in the band at that time, Wes?
About 30.
30. All from the Wadsworth area.
Right.
Can you remember any trumpet players, for instance?
Dick Venner
Dick Venner,
was a trumpet player, and Harold Steyer,
Harold Steyer,
and
wasn't there a Cyberding girl that was a trumpet player too?
yes, but she didn't play with the band very often.
Did she?
They were all men.
Well, most of them were
Men
men.
and boys.
Yeah.
Better say boys, because
Men and boys.
yes.
And that was legal at that time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Couldn't do it today, as you well know. What about the clarinet players? Who played with you?
Well, Byron Houseworth
Byron Houseworth,
and Harold McGinnis.
Harold McGinnis, who became, well, no, it was Don McGinnis who became the band director of Ohio State University.
Yes, and Don also played.
Don played clarinet, very good clarinet, that's one of the best. And anybody else?
I don't.
Who played woodwinds? I mean, we have trombone, brass.
Trombones was Mr. Mason. I can't come up with his first name right now.
Dwight
Mason, yes. And Don Harper.
Don Harper, who drove a taxi cab. He had his own taxi cab company in the 30s and 40s.
Yes. You got a good picture of these people.
Well, somewhat. Somewhat. Anybody else?
Well, there were some of the younger boys. Just the names escape me right now.
Of course they do, but if they come up, we'll talk about them. Now, after you went from being one of the boys to becoming an adult, and of course you regard yourself in Wadsworth as a young boy until you're about 90 years old, because in the days that you were growing up, there was a pecking order, and the older people didn't let you move ahead of them. I believe that that's probably fairly accurate. It might be an opinion, but I think it's fairly accurate. Now, you then became a band or an orchestra director all of your own, did you not?
Well, I also directed the city band when nobody else was around.
Okay, you directed the city band when no one else was around. I suspect that that's a rather humble appraisal of your abilities, but you were in charge of the city band when Mr. Opplinger wasn't there, is that correct?
Yes.
And was that fairly often?
No, it was just on slight occasions when we played concerts on Saturday night on the bandstand in the park. And if he wasn't able to be there, why, I gave him the downbeat and got him started.
Got them started. This would have been what, in the 20s, mid-20s?
Yes.
And how many people would come to the concerts, and who were they and where'd they come from?
Well, all over town. They'd come and park their cars around the square there in the afternoon and walk home so they could come down at night and sit in their car to listen to the band
Listen
play.
to the band, isn't that right? Now, the square that you're talking about is College Street, Broad Street, High Street, and
Yes.
Main Street, right?
Right.
Now, in those days, we parked in the middle of Main Street, at least, didn't we?
In the middle and also on the side.
On the sides. So you could put quite a few cars there. And of course, there were old cars. I mean, they were brand new then probably, but there were cars that were in the 19 teens and the 20s. Is that correct?
Yes.
They would go home, they would walk home, they would come back and sit in their cars and listen to the band. Was it a significant number of people who would do that?
No, I don't expect so. Probably a dozen cars that could park near the bandstand there on Broad Street.
On Broad Street. And did they play right from the bandstand, or did they play on that area behind the bandstand?
I played right on the bandstand.
Right on the bandstand. The bandstand was made out of stone, is that right? It's been since torn
Yes.
down, and we have a new gazebo there. What kind of condition was it in the 20s?
Well, it was very good condition then. I don't know how old it was, but it wasn't real old. It had replaced, the stone replaced the original wooden stand.
Oh, there was a wooden one there before the stone one, and now it's back to wood again. What comes around goes around. Tell us about your involvement in the Methodist Church Orchestra.
Well, I just started playing there when I was probably 14, and Mr. Harper, H.C. Harper, was the director, and he got the group together, and he died at a rather young age. I don't remember how old he was, but when he died, Floyd Prince,
Floyd Prince, who was a hardware man, is that right?
his son,
His son. Floyd's father was with Prince Keller Coon Hardware, correct?
yes.
And
now
Floyd would be-
was just
A boy.
actually a year younger than I.
Mm-hmm.
And he, at some point along there, he went to the Cincinnati Music
Conservatory of Music, right.
I forget whether that was after he had directed the band, I think. or
And what did he play? What was his instrument?
Clarinet.
Clarinet as well. And then what happened after Floyd no longer was the director of the Methodist Church Orchestra?
Well, that's when I took over.
You took over. What year was that?
Possibly 1928.
1928. Somewhere in your well, let's see, where would it be? We're looking here at some pictures, but didn't you have a program? Do you have a program of the Methodist Church Orchestra and some of its members? Oh, here it is, right. I'm going to read them to you because these people are notable. Gene Gillespie and Harry Gates played piano, and both of those were outstanding pianists. Harriet Gates is now gone. Violins, I see a name here that I recognize, Crescenzo Carino, a brother of mine. He was not a member of that church. As a matter of fact, he played there, and then he went directly to his own church, of Sacred Heart, following, but he played in the orchestra. Ruth Ray, now gone, and Ruth and my brother played in the high school band together. Howard Fraley and Catherine Freed, who knew all of those people, and cornets, Bob Ziegler, a tremendous cornetist, and Glenn Shepler, remember him, Paul Bunnell. Paul then became involved with a funeral home in Wadsworth, did he not?
I'm I'm not sure.
I think he did. And Lewis Close, who was the superintendent's son.
Right.
And he married one of the young girls, did he not? Betty, Marion, no. Which young girl did he marry?
You said Betty. That sounds familiar.
Maybe it is Betty. Okay. But then Bob Crumbley played trombone, and Paul Kreitz, the euphonium. And here are the clarinetists: Byron Houseworth, Don McGinnis, Maxine Mosier, Elsie Hanchey, and Pauline Schenk played flute, as did Esther Melvin, who is now Esther Melvin Daniels. We're going to be interviewing her because she was the first person in Wadsworth to be the, well, she was the sesquicentennial queen in 1939. So we're going to interview her a little later on. And Marilyn Nelson, who was just a little girl at the time, because Marilyn is only, if she's still living, she'd be only about 71 or 72 years old now, wouldn't she? She was a young girl. And then Harold McGinnis played saxophone. Dr. G.R. McRitchie played bassoon, one of the very few bassoon players, and he was a dentist. Garland Christian, who's still living, isn't he? And he played bass viol. And W.H. Allen, director. That's quite a program. We need to keep that. Maybe we can make a copy of it for the Historical Society, because that's very important. What prompted you to start the, well, I guess for the want of a better name, start a career in music? Was it just the love of music, or was it the fact that someone pushed you into it? Was it the right time, the right place? Tell us why you started in music.
Well, it just happened that my family was interested in music. All we had then, we didn't have radios. We had phonographs that we wound up and had discs on. I even had one my grandmother had that had cylindrical records. And in other words, we sort of entertained ourselves.
That's the only thing that you had to do, was to entertain yourself. Did you play in the school band as well?
Yes.
Who was the director at the time?
Well, there again, I think it was Clyde Opplinger.
Clyde Opplinger. He was quite a musician around town.
Yeah.
Now, what about his descendants? Are they still around?
There
are a lot of Opplinger families, but I mean the direct descendants, so his children and probably his grandchildren.
No, he never had any children.
No children at all. No. So that's the Opplingers we have in town right now are not related to Clyde Opplinger.
Not close anyhow.
Not close to Clyde Opplinger. I want to go back to your Methodist school, Methodist Church Orchestra here in a couple seconds, if we possibly have time. But before we do that, I want to ask a question about the mat shop, which we may not be able to ever get the answer to again. And that is, what was the pay of a person who worked as a secretary in the mat shop in 1927?
Well, probably $75 a month.
$75 a month. And would it be too insensitive to ask you what your pay was in 1927?
I got to think that one out. Well, that's what I got, $75 a month.
You got $75 a month.
At the start.
Now, with the $75 a month, and these are the personal things, if you don't want to answer the question, you don't have to. What were you able to do with $75 a month at that time? Did you have a car?
No.
And when did you get your first car?
I got my first car in, I think it was 1928.
And what kind was it?
It was a 1920 Dodge.
1920 Dodge.
Used car.
And you paid how much for it?
$50.
$50.
I bought it at an auction sale.
You bought it at an auction sale, and it ran?
Oh, yes.
And it ran well. Now, with the $75 a month, were you really strapped for having to pay $50 a month, or $50 for that car, or were you able to buy it outright? Did you have to?
No, I could buy it outright.
You bought it outright.
We were careful with our money.
Extremely careful with your money. There are no credit cards, right?
No.
And as a matter of fact, almost no credit, really, because if you didn't have the money, you wouldn't buy anything. So you probably saved $1 a week for 50 weeks, probably. Is that correct?
Yes.
To buy a car for $50. Do you remember buying gasoline in 1928?
Yes.
And how much was it?
16 cents a gallon.
16 cents a gallon. Was there a difference in high test or low test, or was it all the same, just gasoline?
There was high test and low test.
Low test. Tell us how you, where were the gas stations and who owned them?
Well, they were around the square. There was one on College Street. I can't think what's there now.
I think that's they're right there, right this very minute is a thrift store or something, or very close to that thrift store, or a copying store, where
Yeah.
Don Merriman was at one time.
Yeah,
But that was a
that's
Ford garage too, wasn't it?
Yes.
And they had a gas station out in front.
Well, the Ford garage was on west, about 2 buildings.
2 buildings west. And actually, you had to park on the street almost to get gasoline, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, there was no place to go in. You get gasoline. What were the gas pumps like?
Well, they were just a pump that you had to crank up by hand.
You cranked it up by hand and it came up to a gallon,
Yes.
and then you let that go into your car, and cranked up another gallon, let that go into your car, and had a glass tube on it, was it
Well,
not?
you could pump up 5 gallons in
5 full gallons? I didn't realize you can go that high. I thought it was only a gallon. You got 5 gallons at a time. And, excuse me, if you went for $1 worth of gas, how many gallons of gas could you buy?
well, depend.
About 5.5 or 6 gallons of gas.
Yes.
And many people would do that. They would get $1 worth of gas. Now, $1 worth of gas today is not even a full gallon, as you well know. But it was, and you could drive for a long time on $1 worth of gas. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about the 20s, you had to have a car repaired every now and then.
Yes.
Where would you have it repaired?
Well, where the dealer that you bought it from had a repair shop, and there were other people who were just mechanics.
And who were some of those people?
Well, my brother was one.
Okay, your brother was one, and that's what I wanted to hear you say. And he was where?
Well, he started out repairing in my grandmother's barn
Which was where?
on Pine Street.
Pine Street. And then where did he move?
And then later on, of course, he worked at the Ford garage, and that was on College Street.
And tell us brother's name.
My brother was Ross.
Ross Allen. And what is that company, what did that finally lead up to?
Well, he started an auto parts business.
And it was called Allen Auto Parts, right? Ross Allen. And he is your brother, younger brother, is he not? Or,
Older.
No, he's older brother? Okay, he's an older brother. Joanne, well, that's right, you'd have to be, because Joanne is my age. His daughter Joanne is my age, and you would not be old enough to be my father, I don't think.
Right.
So then where was Allen Auto Parts at that time?
Well, he started up on the driveway, maybe it's called an alley off of Highland.
It's called Highland Place now.
Highland Place, between Highland and Lyman Street.
Right. The house right to the north of the driveway was owned by Hartzels, is that correct?
Yes.
Right. The Hartzels. And then that little driveway that you call it is now Highland Place, right near the fire station. And then Allen Auto Parts was bought up by, well, it's still there, isn't it?
They moved down on the College, or Broad Street, where the Banner Press building had been. And somewhere along the line, he joined with M&S Auto Parts.
M&S Auto Parts, right, that's right, several years ago. Were there any other garages in town where you can get your car repaired?
Yes, there was a Buick garage on Broad Street.
Well, it's behind Broad Street
That was right.
in an alley.
No,
wasn't it?
this is right on Broad Street.
Oh, really?
Just west of, is there a library still there?
You know, the library's still there.
Okay, it was just west of the library.
West of the library.
Just a driveway in between. There might have been another house.
Was that Forey Wright?
I knew Flory, but I don't recall.
He had a Buick garage at one time.
Okay, that was the place then.
And then Homer Fiskus had a garage on Auble Street, did he not?
Yes.
And what about Clyde Weltzine? Was he in there yet?
I knew Clyde, but I can't.
He had his garage right across the alley from where M&S Auto Parts is right now, where the Marathon station is.
Well, that was
Emsch?
where the Buick garage was.
That's where the Buick garage
Yes,
was.
and of course.
Was that Emsch?
Weltzine must have been in there as
Later.
doing the repair work.
Later on? Mhm. Was that Emsch by chance? No, it wasn't he.
No.
Well, we'll come up with a name. We need to go back to the match shop for a couple of seconds because we're running out of time here, Wesley, and I want to get the match shop. When the match shop was in its glory, you said earlier that the match company had only one shift. When did they go to 2 shifts and when did they go to 3 shifts? Do you remember that?
No, but it was later on when they were making book matches.
Okay, they did not make book matches at the very beginning, is that
No.
correct? Tell us why they didn't make book matches right at the very beginning.
Well, who ever heard of book
That's
matches?
right. That's right. Today, who has ever heard of stick matches, really? We had what was called the big stick and the little stick, wee-wees, right?
Right.
But we didn't have book matches at all.
Right.
Did Wadsworth Match Company pioneer book matches, or were they pioneered elsewhere?
They were started elsewhere.
They were started elsewhere. I believe that's correct. They, the book matches had a special kind of
Striking surface?
striking surface. Now, tell us about that striking surface and why was it done that way? Safety matches, they call them.
Well, it was so that you didn't set off the whole book of matches. You were supposed to put the cover over the
Close
pull
cover
one
before
match
striking.
off, and then put the cover over and then strike it on the surface, which was at the bottom.
That's right. What about the stick matches? Where could you light those?
You could light them anywhere.
Anywhere at all. Just all you'd have to do is
Right.
to
Friction.
strike them, and they would. So these were safety matches. They're much safer, and also you could carry them in your pocket a little bit more easily
Yeah.
than you could either the wee-wees. And of course, you could never carry the big box because they're about 2 inches wide and 1.5 inches high and about 4 or 5 inches long, were they not?
Yes,
And they contained about 500 matches or
250.
250 matches. And how many matches were in the book matches?
20.
20. I can still remember the stitchers up there, and they would, with their hands like this all day long, and never once miss in picking out exactly 20 matches. That was just phenomenal, or as many matches they were picking out, I've forgotten how many it were, but they was just phenomenal. And it was a horribly noisy place. I worked there one summer, one evening as a matter of, in the evening, and when the whistle blew for the break, it was just dead quiet instantly, and then all of a sudden the machines would start rolling again. It was very, very noisy. I worked there in the 1950, I believe, 1949 I worked there, just for one summer, and I was transferred from the shipping room all the way up to the book match, and there were fires all over the place. It became so commonplace that you didn't even notice them at all. Wesley, you have been an extremely interesting person, and the only person we have had so far from the Ohio Match Company. You gave us a lot of insight. We are so grateful and so indebted to you for all of this. We hope that if there's more information that you have that you would like to share with us, you let us know, and we'll contact you again, and by all means, we'll interview you, because you, Wesley Allen, bring a part of history that no one else has. And thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you.